Section 18 of From the Latchkey of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Larry Wilson. From the Latchkey of My Bookhouse, edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Mare, Walter de la. English poet, 1873. Markham, Charles Edwin, American, 1852. A little 5-year-old boy once went from Oregon City to live with his widowed mother and deaf-dumb brother on a lonely ranch in California. Here the boy worked at farming, blacksmithing, herding, and when he earned $20 for plowing a neighbor's field, he bought himself some books. But his mother was a stern, hard woman who cared little about his education. So at length the boy ran away from home to work with a band of threshers, nor would he return until his mother promised to let him work his way through school. In college Markham supported himself by teaching freshman classes while doing sophomore and junior work, and he and 4 other students lived in a bare room under the college bell tower, cooking their own meals, which consisted chiefly of beans. When he began writing verse for the California papers, he found success and later did newspaper work in New York. His best known poem is "The Man with the Hoe." Masefield, John. English, 1878. As a small boy, Masefield used to run away from home, sometimes for days at a time. So at last his father sent him to sea to work off his surplus energy aboard a merchant vessel. For 10 years he lived on the ocean and gained there that love of ships and the sea which colors all his work. But when he was 16 he left the ship at New York with $5 and a chest of clothes, fired now with desire to study. He worked on a farm, in a bakery, in a hotel, and in a carpet factory, but every Friday on payday he went to the bookstore and bought books. Then the day came when he began to write. He has written stirring narrative poems and splendid stories of adventure. Important works: Martin Hyde, the Duke's Messenger; Jim Davis, Voyages of Discovery. Meredith George, English novelist, 1822 to 1909. Miller, Joaquin, Cincinnatus Heine Miller, 1841 to 1913. A prairie schooner in early pioneer days, toiling westward, westward across the desert, across the Rockies, across the Sierras, and in the lumbering old wagon among his elders a small boy named Cincinnatus Heine Miller. The boy's family were on their way from Indiana, where he had been born, to settle in Oregon. The very spirit of the West seemed to breathe itself into that boy, the free, breezy spirit of America's great western plains, where there is room to turn around in, to breathe and be free. And to east and to west, to north and the sun, blue skies and brown grasses are welded as one, and the buffalo come like a cloud on the plain, pouring on like the tide of a storm-driven main, and the lodge of the hunter to friend and foe offers rest, and unquestioned you come and you go. Young Cincinnatus was often in need of money, so he once set out sturdily from his home and joined a woodcutter's camp. There the small urchin was found by his elders chopping away at a great rate, nor would he return until he had earned what he set out to get. Later he joined the gold miners in California, and for 5 years he lived among the Pacific Coast Indians. In Cañon City, Colorado, where he practiced law, he met a certain Mexican bandit named Joaquin, whose name struck him as so much more picturesque and interesting than his own that he cast away Cincinnatus Heine forever and henceforth called himself Joaquin. Soon he published a volume of Western poems called Joaquin et al., but it was when he went to London a few years later that the big breezy Westerner made his first great success with Songs of the Sierras. England grew most enthusiastic and feted him everywhere. At all festivities he appeared in a flannel shirt and sombrero. In a beautiful retreat called the Heights on the crest of a mountain in California he passed the later years of his life. Here he lived in good old Western simplicity with his mother and a few friends, the best loved writer of the West, the poet of the Sierras. Important works: True Bear Stories. Milton, John (English, 1608 1674). John Milton was a stern old Puritan, a born rebel from his boyhood, an apostle of liberty, who hated tyranny and was yet neither gracious nor tender. He was Secretary of Foreign Tongues to Oliver Cromwell, the Puritan protector of England, and during that work became totally blind. But with his tremendous power and force he never gave up his work. Out under the trees in his garden he forced his 3 daughters to read to him hour after hour long, tiresome books of which they often understood nothing. With Cromwell's death and the return of the Royalists to power, Milton lost his standing and was forced for a time to go into hiding. His books against the Royalist cause were publicly burnt and he himself was thrown into prison. When he was released he was a friendless old man, blind as well, but with that tremendous spirit of his he set to work once again and finished the most powerful of all his works, one of the greatest epic poems in the English language, Paradise Lost, as well as 2 other long poems. Nekrasov Nikolai Alexeyevich, Russian, 1821 78. Nekrasov was one of the early patriots of Russia who dared to speak out against the tyranny and oppression of the Tsar. His mother was a gentle Polish woman who gave her whole life to teaching him, instilling into him heart and soul the love of simple, kindly things. This made him hate all the more the ugly punishments he saw when he went on trips with his father, a brutal Russian officer and chief of district police. When Nikolai refused to be a soldier, his father disinherited him. For 3 years he worked his way through college, hungry day and night, but at last by his ceaseless efforts he made a place for himself in the literary world and rose to be editor of Russia's foremost magazine. Through his vivid pen pictures of all types of Russian life, he led young Russia to hate oppression, to understand the various classes of their own country, especially the working class, and to love freedom. Nesbit, Edith, English writer of children's stories, 1858. Newell, Peter, American, 1862. One of the most original of humorists, whose drawings of funny little round-eyed children exactly fit his funny little verses. Pictures and Rhymes, The Top-Turvies, The Slant Book. Noel, Thomas, English poet, 1799 1861. Noyes, Alfred, English, 1880. One of the foremost English poets of the present day. He was born in Staffordshire and educated at Oxford. In 1913 he gave a course of lectures in Boston on The Sea in English Poetry, and was for the next 3 years visiting professor at Princeton University. Payne, Albert Bigelow, American, 1861. Albert Bigelow Payne was born in New Bedford, Maine, and educated at Xenia, Illinois. He began writing for the Kansas newspapers while living in Fort Scott, and from there went to New York. He had been a department editor of St. Nicholas, and has written many delightful stories for children. Important works: The Arkansas Bear, Hollow Tree and Deep Woods Book. Perrault, Charles, French, 1628 1703. A courtly French author who made the first collection of French fairy tales, which he called Tales of Mother Goose. These were not the Jingles, but the stories of Cinderella, the Sleeping Beauty, etc. Poe, Edgar Allan. American, 1809 to 1849. A great American poet and writer of short stories, but of an eccentric genius, dark and unhappy. Poulsen, Anne Emile, 1853. Miss Poulsen is a prominent kindergarten worker. Important works: Father and Baby Plays, The Runaway Donkey, Through the Farmyard Gate. Prentice, Elizabeth. American, 1818 to 1878. Pringle, Thomas. Scotch, 1789 to 1834. A Scotch writer who made an interesting trip to Africa. Pyle, Howard. American, 1853 to 1911. Small boy once lay on the rug before the fire in a certain house in Wilmington, Delaware, while his mother read him Robinson Crusoe. Vividly he pictured to himself all the interesting history of that venturesome hero as he tramped about on his lonely island with the savage Friday. Sometimes Howard Pyle's mother read him Gulliver's Travels, Tanglewood Tales, Ivanhoe, or the Arabian Nights. But whatever she read, he always lay there and saw pictures, pictures, pictures. Often he tried to put these pictures down in drawing. Indeed, his mother inspired him early with a love of all beautiful things, particularly pictures and books. Once, when he was a very tiny boy, he felt himself so moved to write a poem that he called for paper and pencil, and was sitting with paper on knee, all ready to write before he ever stopped to think that he did not yet know how to read nor to make a single letter. Keen was young Howard's disappointment. Rather than go to college when he grew up, Howard Pyle went to an art school where his ability to make pictures was trained. Since he so dearly loved pictures and books, he began making illustrations, and soon he was both writing and illustrating his own stories. How he loved a quaint old picturesque tale of adventure, whether of knights or of pirates, and he left boys and girls many tales of both, illustrated with vigor and a keen love of color and beauty, for Howard Pyle was one of America's foremost illustrators. The Garden Behind the Moon, The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, Men of Iran, The Wonder Clock, Otto the Silver Hand, Stolen Treasure, Pepper and Salt, Men of Iron. Catherine Pyle, American contemporary. Catherine Pyle is the sister of Howard Pyle, and is herself an author and artist of unusual merit. As the Goose Flies, The Christmas Angel, Careless Jane, Fairy Tales from Many Lands. Ramée, Louise de la, 1859 to 1908. Once there was a little girl living in France, the child of a French father and an English mother. When she began trying to say her own name, Louisa could call herself nothing but Ouida. Little did she or her parents dream that she was going to make that name of Ouida famous. When she was 20, she left France and went to England, where she began at once to write stories. Her romances were extravagant, sentimental, and impossible things, but they were wildly popular, and they made her a large fortune. Then off went Miss Ouida to live in Italy in such fashion as she deemed fitting for a wealthy and famous young novelist. Tales are told of how she rode through the streets of Florence in a coach lined with sky blue leather, wearing an orange-colored dress and black lace mantilla. Poor foolish little lady! In spite of her great success and her many fine qualities, she was helpless, vain, and unbusinesslike, and her last years found her in poverty, deserted by all save a few dumb pets of which she was always passionately fond. Her only work of real value is that written for children. Important works: The Dog of Flanders, The Nuremberg Stove, Bimbi, Moufflou. Rands, William Brighty. English, 1823 to 1880. Ransom, Arthur. English, contemporary. Richards, Laura E., American contemporary, daughter of Julia Ward Howe and a noted writer for children. Important works: Captain January, The Joyous Story of Toto, The Golden Windows. Riley, James Whitcomb, American, 1853 to 1916. James Whitcomb Riley is the beloved poet of Indiana, the Hoosier poet, who has written so many homely, heartfelt things of and for the people in their own simple style and idiom. He worked first as a sign painter, then joined a company of strolling players for whom he wrote songs and plays. Later he was one of the editors of the Indianapolis Journal. A genuine poet of childhood was Riley, too, full of deep love and sympathy for children. A Host of Children, Riley's Childhood Rhymes Illustrated in Color. Section 18.